Well, you get yourself sorted, but it's your video call. You know, after this effort, I'd like to show our face too, if I'm honest. But
yeah, I mean, I suppose they all know what my face looks like, so it's a case of making sure you guys are known. I don't think that's going to allow me to show my face for some reason, but we are recording, we are live. I just need to run and go grab those samples from upstairs.
Okay, cool. Do you think you can take that? You can react directly to what I'm saying, Joe. And if I go, and when we distill through column, I want you to move it to the column. I'll have to get his samples.
Right, we have samples.
Excuse me.
As you can all see, you've been given quite a wonderful tour around the still room at Filey Bay here. That wonderful face you saw was Morgan. I'm not sure who's manning the camera, but thank you very much for your wonderful work.
He's our whiskey director, Joe.
Oh,
he makes the whiskey. He's the guy who makes the whiskey.
Man to show it off.
Right, yeah, he is actually, in fairness. Yeah.
So, everything says we're recording. Everything says we're good to go.
Great.
Morgan, thank you very much for going into the still room and getting this wonderful shot for us.
No problem.
For those of you watching, there is no camera on my side, but that doesn't matter. You know what I look like. The important thing is the questions we're going to ask Morgan, and indeed the whiskey that we're going to be sort of talking through, all of which are wonderfully presented in front of him on that barrel there. But for most of our fans, for most of the fans watching Morgan, let's just kind of talk about Filey Bay and its origins, how it came to be, if there was any sort of idea behind everything, because I think most people think historically distilleries start with the idea to want to change or develop something, but was Filey Bay just like a passion project, or was it something which had a direct ideal behind
it? Born, sounds like a cliche romance copy thing to say, but born from farming, really, Phil. So as a business, we've owned about 4 or 5 miles that way up the hill. We've got a large arable farm growing wheat and barley. And as a family, not me personally, I've got very soft hands, but as a family, the business owners have farmed that land since 1945. So Tom Mellor and their family are the business, and David Thompson and Tom are best pals, played rugby together as kids. Kids have gone to school together. They got their heads together in 2016 to open the distillery. So really it came from farming to brewing in 2003 with Woldtop Brewery. And then we went on to distilling in 2016. So rather than obviously a labour of passion, a labour of love, but in the first instance, we were barley farmers.
Excellent. Kind of the perfect way to start it out. I think we always talk about whiskey and casks and distillate levels, but we always forget about where it comes from, which at the end of the day is farmers. It's all the byproduct of that, indeed. What is the first whiskey we're going to be sort of enjoying, Morgan, just to kind of kick this whole sort of walkthrough off with?
Well, it's a flagship whiskey. It's our only true core release of everything we do. Though the 5 whiskies we've tasted are at different batch numbers. This is the first whiskey, the only whiskey we're tasting, which will be continually and forever available as a dead certain at this stage. And productionally, it's not dissimilar from the first or second release, which were 2019, in a sense that it's fully bourbon matured, fully first fill bourbon matured. So it's our flagship whiskey, Phil, aged in first fill bourbon, brown form and Old Forester casks. And yeah, just like the first release and the second release, you're looking for big, creamy, rich vanilla flavors. The spirit, as with all of our spirits, because we grow all the barley ourselves, because it's our own barley, our own farm, our own water, we don't peat the spirit at all. We don't peat the barley at all. So it's a non-peated spirit, light and fruity in style, house whiskey. Yeah,
I mean, I'm smelling it now. For what I'm ashamed to say is the first time, because every time you've come in with samples and stuff, I've always been ill and not been able to taste them. Yeah, when you talk about those big, creamy, lemony notes, it is really all around this thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely a lot of lemon a lot of lemon citrus. For me, vanilla ice cream's big, especially on the palate. It's got a rich creaminess to it on the palate, which is always nice to be reminded of. Actually, as a sales manager for a distillery, it's always nice doing these things because it gives you a chance to actually taste the range yourself and remind yourself of what you're doing. It's quite a nice thing, you know.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head. Obviously, you talk about the whiskey daily, but it is this wonderful, creamy, vanilla-driven style. There's loads of fresh citrus and lemon, and even like kind of pineapple chunk things going on with it. I mean, we've been we're not obviously spoilt for weather in England most of the time, but we've just come off a wonderful, like, super hot couple of days, and I can see why most people probably would have been drinking that throughout all of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. A summer whiskey as whiskies go. Light, fruity, sweet styles. Very much what we're going through with all of our spirit. So yeah, I'd say as whiskies go, definitely a summer whiskey. Perhaps even a breakfast whiskey if you're feeling brave, Phil. You know, it's
Indeed,
yeah, that's the style we're going for.
I think we've all had moments like that, and obviously, unfortunately, my camera isn't working. But for those of you that haven't seen the bottle, it is a natural coloured, non-chill filtered product at 46% alcohol. I believe the whole range is. So
yes.
For those of you that are quite adamant about having that along your bottle in a very organic presentation, you've no need to worry about that with any of these because they all have that. But
as proud Yorkshiremen, we couldn't do something so insincere as adding caramel to our whiskey, Phil. That's
without a doubt, I expect nothing more from the proud people of Yorkshire than a natural presentation. That's a beautiful, elegant, easy drinking style. And from my regular job outside of Whiskey Wednesday, even though within Whiskey Wednesday I've been asked about Filey Bay quite a lot and English whiskey, I've seen demand for this grow, even as someone who currently doesn't have it in their own retail unit yet. It is within our company, as you and I spoke about before. But whenever whiskey shows are on or whiskey festivals and that kind of thing, we always have an influx of people. And obviously it's towards the latter part of the year, sort of September, October. And we always see them coming in and they've always got, whatever the whiskey festival is, whatever the branded bag is, you know, a good 50-60% of the time, they've always got a bottle of Filey Bay in there.
That's good. That's good.
Certainly from the people I've spoke to, obviously yourself, you might be at these festivals. There might be a couple of your colleagues there too. But even some of my regular customers, some of our regular club members within the whiskey shop, you know, they've told me more about Filey Bay than I've managed to read about online and that kind of thing. So the demand and the want for this stuff is very clear. It's very sort of passionate and in demand, which is, I know, words I've already used, but nonetheless, it's always nice to see. And with English whiskey,
it's nice to hear.
Well, I mean, we always like to pass this kind of information on because it's always been a whiskey where people have told me about it and then I've not been able to try it for whatever reason, and now I finally can, and I get it just off the Flagship. As a reference for those of you listening and watching this video, imagine in terms of a Scotch equivalent, something like Annock or Aberfeldy. It's this kind of honeyed, citrusy, buttery style of whiskey, but at 46% with a natural presentation. The demand for English whiskey, personally, I've seen grow a lot, and there are a couple of big movers in that at the minute. I would class you guys as one of them, purely due to the amount people are talking about your brand. And I think just looking at the bottles that you sent me all the way back, I think like September or October last year when we originally tried to do this, things just got in the way. Just looking at what's in front of me and how much experimentation and fun you guys are putting into the brand. So we've got the Flagship, I've got the Peated finish, the STR finish, a Moscatel finish, and then an IPA Cask Finish. All of which my colleagues in work tried earlier on today and again sort of sang their praises. But with you being an English distillery and with you having a beautiful pot still to your left and a column still behind you, you've created that buttery style, that kind of lemony, easy drinking style. It's a combination of the two stills, yes? Yes,
correct. Yeah. So for 6 months of the year, our new make is coming straight from the pot still to my left. That's coming out at 73%, and that gets obviously diluted to 63.5 before going into, I would say, 95% first fill bourbon cask with some sherry butts and other interesting barrels. For 6 months of the year, if you can see as a point with my wonderful cameraman / whiskey director, along the line arm there, we redirect to go through the column. So for 6 months, we're getting an extra 4 plates of copper contact in the column still. Lots of reflux. So through that, we're creating, I'd say the major difference, firstly, is ABV. With the column, you've got an 86% new make spirit coming out. But secondly, with the column, you've got a much higher in esters, lighter, fruitier spirit style. And with the pot, for me, the major difference between the two new makes is mouthfeel. With the pot, it's got an oilier texture on the palate. They're both very light and fruity spirits for obvious reasons. Similar yeast, well, same yeast, same fermentation. But it's actually more about the mouthfeel between the two spirit styles. And importantly with that, it's only once they're, well, when we're decided they're fully matured, that those two spirit styles are going to meet in order to produce, you know, Filey Bay Whisky, what we have here. So it's been quite interesting, obviously. Funny enough, the guy moving the camera is the guy who makes these decisions. So I tread lightly in describing whiskey so carefully with it, but I've seen a natural progression from, well, not I'd say a natural progression, but the ratio from column to pot in our whiskies has changed expression to expression. And I always make a point of asking Joe about it because I find it quite fascinating. I hope you do too. But, you know, for the Flagship, initially, it varies batch to batch, but, you know, that was more of a column heavy whiskey. And then when we got things like, right in saying our Sherry Cask Reserve's fully pot distilled, Sherry Cask Reserve number 2. So it gives almost, to coin a romantic term, and again, I tread lightly because the guy who does it stood right behind the camera. But it gives the whiskey maker, I suppose, more shades of colour to play with from a palette painting perspective, to use that analogy. Does that make any sense, Phil?
No, totally. I've been doing a lot of research into English whiskey, and I cannot remember the name of it, but I know like an alliance has just been sort of announced and formed within English whiskey as like an equivalent to the SWA. I cannot remember what it's called.
The English Whiskey Guild.
The English Whiskey Guild, the EWG.
And going through the geographical indication as we speak, for what English whiskey is defined as. Now you're gonna ask me to quote what those rules are, and I'll be honest with you, Phil, I can't remember specifically. So I can remember the majority, to be honest.
No, I'm not going to ask you for those rules. I think if anyone watching or listening to this video is interested in that, by means, give it a Google. It's been a very busy week for myself, and I can't remember like what orders I've got to put through after we finish this, let alone what the rules to the EWG are. Well, I think the beauty of English whiskey in its current state, even without these geographical indicators, is the ability to experiment and the ability to be different.
Absolutely.
We have other English distilleries in this country who are doing pure pot still, and some like yourselves being experimental and keeping it interesting. And I know single malt's the famous style of whiskey, but there's some amazing grain whiskies out there and column distillates and that yourselves that you your own whiskey, as well as people like Loch Lomond and whatever Middleton are doing in terms of weird experimentation as well. So I think the beauty of seeing those two stills behind you in this shot kind of shows off what this chat is really about, and how, as beautiful as a pot still is, and as you mentioned, the viscosity of the mouthfeel and the oily texture, fantastic. But tasting that Flagship, and I love those citrusy light styles of whiskey anyway, they're my cup of tea. So if that's involving column distillation as well as aged distillate from those stills, I'm all for it, really. You know, Scotland makes pot still whiskey very well. There's no point why we can't just kind of move out of those boundaries with new definitions and new categories. So I'm all kind of for you guys experimenting as much as possible. I hope the WG keep that within the guidelines.
Well, we are within the guidelines. We are, and I think it's a double-edged sword in many ways, because by giving English whiskey some protection, this is speaking from my own personal opinion, you are ensuring that it's not going to get, you know, cowboyed, for lack of a better term. But equally, it could be, if it weren't managed carefully and negotiated and discussed amongst a board of representatives carefully, it could be limiting for the distilleries, you know. So yeah, there's a catch-22 to it. Everybody wants a bit more wiggle room perhaps than they're getting, or some people want less. So there's definitely been some, from my understanding, it's not me on having these conversations, of course, but there's definitely been quite a lot of conversation had about the subject, really, about what English whiskey is. And I think, to draw it back to our field to bottle process a little, I think one thing that I was quite glad to hear is the sourcing of the barley You know, has to be UK. That's something that's, for me, quite important. It's one of those subjects, with respect to all world whiskey producers, it's one of those things that I wasn't as aware of as I could have been when I started here. And I remember standing in these still room with Joe and talking about whiskey and what I know about whiskey, which was infantile compared to what I know now. And when field to bottle was brought to attention, you know, we grow all the barley ourselves. I kind of shrugged, like, yeah, and what? Who doesn't? You know, you know. And so that's been quite a prominent thing. And I think, you know, I think the sourcing of the barley is quite an important subject, if nothing else, from a sustainability point of view, from a food miles point of view.
No, I agree with you. It's something which I think is the most important part of modern whiskey, is talking about barley sourcing and where all that is actually going to come from, because not enough people really kind of pay attention to that, in my view. And as farming goes, it's something I overlook quite a bit. This meeting is telling me that we only have 9.5 minutes left. So
that's impressive.
I know. Thank God for some sort of technology working. In the event this cuts out, I will just make another link and we'll kind of carry on. I can edit the two together. But in terms of what we're doing next, Morgan, what are we going to next?
Well, we're going to not taste it in the order of release.
That's
we're
okay.
going to taste it in the order that I like to taste it in, Phil.
Good.
So we're going to taste the IPA finish next. Because for me, it's maturation-wise one of the most interesting whiskies we do. It's quite easy to share the story if you're familiar. Often when I speak tastings at the events or things about Filey Bay Whisky, about an IPA cask finish, people go, well, IPA is not aged in a cask. And you go, yes, I know, but fortunately we have a sister company, which is Walltop Brewery, and Walltop Brewery produce very nice beer. So my glamorous assistant is actually going to pass me these said beers in order to help me describe this. So it's almost as though we practiced this. The best part of this, Phil, is we didn't.
Yeah,
I'll take the barrel wave.
We've had some technical issues today, and we're kind of getting through them, which is nice.
Yeah. Excuse the noise. So bit long and short. Walltop Brewery is 5 miles that way. It's where the wash for our whiskey is produced. It's the same barley that we grow that produces their beer, that produces our whiskey. It's the same water from chalk aquifers under the farm. It's why their beer is so consistent. Truly, it was my third interview when I learned about Walltop, the connection with Walltop, and that was really good news for me, because every pub, bar, restaurant in my previous hospitality life I've ever ran had Walltop in. I brought it in as standard because it's a brilliant, consistent brewery. Yes. Now, I don't sell their beer, and they don't sell our whiskey, but it was for me a real good stamp of approval, perhaps, to the Walltop connection. Yep. So we got casks that had held Flagship whiskey. We sent them up the hill to Walltop. They put this beer, Scarborough Fair IPA, which I'd describe as a British IPA. It's not as crazy citrus hoppy as some of the American styles. Got a little bit more malty flavour going on. That beer went into a cask, our Flagship casks, for 9 months, during which there's been a little bit of re-fermentation of the beer. It was a warm summer. There's obviously some whiskey remaining in the casks as well. So it's gone in at 6%, come out at 9.1%. That's gone into bottle as Barrel Wave IPA, which is a delicious, brilliant beer. The casks have then come back to us so we can finish our fully bourbon matured whiskey in them, and quite nicely, and an expression of owning the brewery and having that close local aspect. It was the same day the beers have come out of cask that the whiskey has gone back into the casks. So they're very fresh, really juicy, hoppy IPA casks that our whiskey's been finished in. So quite unique in that sense. I know there's one major distillery name that everyone thinks of when we talk about IPA finish. Yeah. And honestly, I actually quite like the Glenfiddich IPA. I think it's a good whiskey. But I do prefer this one personally. And I think that productionally, we've got a little bit more of the edge because we own the brewery and we own the whiskey and we own the farm and the rest, you know.
That's perfect. I remember the IPA Glenfiddich, and I remember thinking it was quite good, but all of the fun of it and the IPA-ness kind of came at the end. Just comparing your Flagship to this side by side, it almost becomes like kind of toastier and more kind of like sweet, like marshmallowy, toffee. The citrusy thing's still in there.
Yeah, agree.
the intensity of the yeast at the back of it too. It's almost giving it almost like kind of brioche champagne thing towards the end. But
I think that's a really, I think the yeasty, champagne-y, almost on-leasiness of it is in reflection of the beer and the hoppy aspects. I think interestingly for me on the palate, not to tell you what to taste, Phil, but for me it doesn't have the same richness as the Flagship does. It actually has a slight bitterness, which is obviously what hops are. Hops are a bittering agent in beer. So it's, to interrupt you, sorry, the champagne reference there is quite, I agree with entirely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I actually gave my colleague Sam, he sent me 2 samples of this, and I gave him one of them just to try while we were closing up the shop in the last hour. And he's like,
Nice.
"Oh, it's so fruity, like it's so clean. The richness almost becomes replaced with like a slightly drying kind of pepperiness around the cheeks and the side of the tongue. I quite enjoy that. It feels like it's got not like a next step in evolution, but it just feels like it's doing something just a little different, which is always nice. And then I'm not a huge IPA guy, not a huge beer guy in general. But again, that slight bitter quality towards the end of it, it just makes it more dimensional. You know, you don't want something to just be sweet and then finish sweet and taste sweet. The development of that's like a fine cocktail, or whatever your favorite other glass of whiskey is. So I think that's a really nice example of IPA finishing from local constituents like yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So
I said I had a trade visit today with a lovely couple who own a little bottle shop locally, and they visited the distillery because they were nearby, and we were tasting, and the woman was so adamant that it tasted of bananas. She could really taste and smell bananas on the IPA finish, and which was her, each to their own with tasting. What you smell, its association, and what we think we taste, etc., etc. But she was so certain. She said, possibly expresses her knowledge of whiskey. She said, There's no banana in it, is there? Because I am actually allergic to bananas. I said, no, nameless, won't embarrass you. There are no bananas in our single malt whiskey. No.
Yeah, I mean, power of persuasion. Now you've said it, I smell it.
Of course. But
it's
the classic. Yeah,
it's kind of like those. This might be a very British thing, but those old foam banana sweets used to get in like pick and mix bags as a kid. I kind of get that, but then again, I get like a nice toasted toffee thing with it too. I don't know if it's the beer providing that or if it's just the casks themselves, if they were slightly different. Yeah, that's really nice. And I remember when you guys did this at a whiskey festival, probably prior to COVID, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, or maybe just during it, perhaps. I remember loads of customers coming in and going, "Oh, we tried the IPA finish, we loved it, but it's all sold out. We can't buy it at the festival anymore." And that was at the Manchester Whiskey Festival. It was either 2 years ago.
Last year.
Was it last year?
Last year. Yeah, it was last year. I actually had COVID at the time of the festival, so I was unable to attend that one. But yeah, the IPA finish tends to be the best. No, not the best. That's the wrong term. Generates the most interest at whiskey shows for sure, because it's quite unique, and people, it's especially when you've got the props I've got in front of me here. It's a really nice story to share.
So with the IPA, it makes sense that it'd be so popular, just because I mean, beer is as vast as whiskey is now. Probably even before whiskey became vast, beer was always massive. So uniting the two companies being one, and then it showing your spirit off in a slightly different light, I think is beyond interesting. So that's a really, really cool whiskey that I can see why people love it so much.
Thank you.
What is next in the lineup, sir? What are you going to introduce us to now as whiskey number 3?
Well, now we're going to move into the world of sherry finishing, the big sweetness. So,
wonderful.
So, a bit simpler, a bit more of a traditional finish, I suppose.
Yeah.
Moscatel sherry hoggies are sent over to us. Moscatel, for those who aren't familiar, I assume 99% of the people watching this video are. Moscatel's obviously a grape, but as a sherry style, it's one below Oloroso, I'd say. Not as sweet as Pedro Jimenez or Oloroso. Well, certainly not as nutty as Oloroso or as dried fruits as Pedro Jimenez. More honey and orange marmalade flavours are associated with Moscatel as a sweet sherry. So we finished our fully bourbon matured whiskey in the Moscatel sherry casks, and they've sat in there for a period of time. and picked up this lovely sweetness.
Yeah, I mean, just on the nose, you mentioned honey, but like the maltiness to it, the kind of toffee nature of it, it's like fudge, and there's like a datey thing to it as well.
Datey is a nice term, yeah. I think dates a good level of dried fruit. Still has enough moisture in it for it not to be raisined as much, you know.
But no, that's an incredible smell. You don't. I mean, Moscatel's becoming a little bit more widely used these days, or indeed, it's been used for a while, and maybe distillers haven't been telling us. Just to put sherry matured on a bottle is quite vague, but we always assume Oloroso and PX.
Yep.
Yeah, in terms of bringing in something interesting to the spirit, that honey note really comes through throughout the whole thing. And you almost get like this rum texture of like brown sugar. It's quite molassesy. I can't think of it. There's not many other whiskies I think use Moscatel. Like Kalila Distillers, like quite a creamy peated spirit anyway. I'm going to get roasted in the comments for not thinking of more Moscatel matured whiskey. I think that is like the only really famous one that's still available, apart from your own.
Well, there's a certain other English whiskey distillery who use Moscatel, but I'll say that we did it first, Phil.
That's all right. I'll believe you. That's totally fine.
And their whiskey, their Moscatel. To be fair, I do truly love their whiskies too, and their Moscatel's great. But yeah, I think ours is a little lighter in style, maybe a bit more delicate, that finish, and still getting the Filey Bay spirit style running through, which I quite like too.
Absolutely, it's still got that nice kind of. I mean, I've said the word malty already, but it does have that. The kind of lemoniness is gone from the Flagship and the IPA, but I suppose Moscatel as a style is just kind of inducing everything with that, again, date-driven, honey, malty biscuit kind of style. It's quite nice that I'm viewing that as quite like an autumnal product. Like,
yeah, certainly,
starts to get a bit colder. It feels like quite a cozy whiskey, if that's a way to describe it. It just feels kind of delicate, comforting.
Like it's giving you a little sugary hug.
Yeah, indeed, and who doesn't love a little sugary hug from a very nice glass of whiskey?
Before we started getting prepared for this evening, so our open day is on the 30th and 31st of July this year. Sounds like a little conscious plug. Actually, I'm just going to plug it for a second.
Okay.
So we've got a distillery open day on the 30th and 31st. And as part of that, I'm going to do a whiskey and cheese pairing with some local cheese producers. And we were tasting, the point in relation to this, which makes it quite a nice segue, is we were tasting with the Moscatel, and we were tasting a range of different blue cheeses with the Moscatel. And it was really interesting, the difference in cheese from really funky, salty, which actually elevated the sweetness of the Moscatel greatly. We ended up, for my background in food, Joe and I perhaps disagreed slightly on one of the pairings. I felt that one that was a little softer, the cheese that was a little softer in flavour, kind of balanced with the Moscatel. We actually agreed that the Roquefort actually elevated. It was not a Roquefort, but it's like a Roquefort style, very salty. Actually elevated the sweetness of the Moscatel and really brought out the Moscatel finish, which we really liked. So, yeah, just a little bit of info for you there.
No, that's good. If anyone's got a bottle of this Moscatel finish at home and you've got some Roquefort-like cheese kicking around, do that combination. I can see why. Like honey and salt is always like quite a nice combination in general. So I can see why that would elevate that to quite a degree. But that's just trying the three side by side or smelling the three side by side, you really see just the development of cask influence through this. And again, one of the reasons I think you are one of them, not necessarily newer. You guys are 6 years old now.
Well, we've been distilling since 6 years. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting to see the development of cask influence, the style, as you said, the percentage of the stills next to you being used throughout this. And again, just something different. I know you guys have probably got Oloroso and PX casks sat in a warehouse, but to release a Moscatel style and for it to be as easy drinking, but still like really decadent compared to your lighter, springer, summery style Flagship bottle. Perfect comparison, and the IPA sits in the middle with that nice bit of kind of dry spiciness and that bitterness. So yeah, wonderful lineup so far. Great pairing.
Thank you.
I'll buy some cheese on the way up. And then, just so that I don't waffle on and we have to re-record another Zoom link, we'll do some questions towards the end. So are we jumping from Moscatel to STR now?
We are indeed, yeah,
Yeah.
STR finish. So awards-wise, interestingly, both the Moscatel and the STR, I think, are equally decorated. So World Whisky Masters gold medals for both,
Wow.
IWSC silvers for both, which is, or at least in last year's IWSC. And so, yeah, I mean, doing good for such a young whiskey. STR finish, you're familiar. And again, no doubt the majority of people filming are familiar with what STR is. But for those who don't know, it's a shaved, toasted, and recharred wine cask finish in whiskey maturation. In our example, it's Rijoca red wine that we finish our fully bourbon matured whiskey in. So we've got casks from Sunny Rijoca in Spain, Phil. We've taken the top and the bottom off the cask. We've shaved the interior by 4 or 5 mil, toasted the barrel, and then recharred the interior, which gives the casks more consistency for whiskey maturation, makes them less variant between barrel to barrel to barrel. Obviously, there might be some that have had Rijoca in for 3 months. There might be some that have had Rijoca in for 6 years. And so by doing the STR process, it makes those casks more consistent for whiskey maturation. But also, for me, detracts from the potential of tannin overpowering your light and fruity whiskey style. Saves your whiskey being potentially pink in colour as well, which are two things you want to avoid. But for me, there's a nice bit of peppery that comes through for that rechar as well, which I quite like. This is I'll sell this a little more because it's my favourite whiskey we do. Has been since I first tasted the Filey Bay range. I just love this whiskey. The Moscatel's a whiskey I drink if I fancy drinking quite a few drams. And the STR's a 1 dram whiskey that I'll read a book with and really, really time with. It's my view now.
No, I can understand that, and I get what you mean in relation to. I didn't realize they were Rijoca barrels, and even with the STR element to it, you get that nice kind of gentle pepperiness that you want from a Rijoca, and the nose is just full of like plum, like it's just these nice juicy like autumnal Christmassy fruits, which I suppose is what you want from a sherry cask anyway. It's kind of the default. And I can see why you would compare this as like just that one kind of big glass of something with your favorite film or a book. There's quite a lot going on. It's slightly more challenging, not as soft and approachable as the Moscatel for sure, but doing something a bit different. And even with STR stuff now, you know, everyone, not everyone, but most, I always say if you can think of something you want a distillery to do, they've probably done it and just not released it. And with this kind of style, it's becoming a bit more common now, and yourselves, Kilhoman have done a few of these kind of things. Cotswolds have a few others, sort of the 3 sort of famous ones, I suppose, in terms of putting it on the front of the label. And I can see why.
There's a connection there, Phil, which is the late great Dr. Jim Swan.
Yes, that was going to be my next point. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all right. It's all right. As long as his name is mentioned, that's the most important thing. Because I know he was like quite instrumental in that style of cask. And as you say, if you're using these heavy Rijoca wine styles, I'm not a huge wine nerd. I know what I like, I know what I don't. I do enjoy a Rijoca, but yeah, the pepperiness can be so intense sometimes and a bit over the top, especially with white or red Riocas. And I like how this is just hinted at with that. Because if you wouldn't have told me it was Rijoca, I'd have just assumed it was a European oak sherry cask. It's got that spiciness to it, a little bit funky. It's clean, it's fresh, but it's still got depth to it, which is seems to be the run of the mill for Filey Bay so far. Clean, fresh, but with quite a lot of depth. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. The reference I made there about perhaps drinking too much of the Moscatel and really taking my time on the STR wasn't meant to be in disrespect to the Moscatel. I just find that sweetness of the Moscatel style is just really quaffable. You can just keep going with it and just drink it quite nicely. The STR is the same, and it definitely gets better 3rd, 4th, and 5th dram. There's no question of it. But there's just a bit more to find in the STR. There's a bit more initially on the nose. There's quite a nice cracked black pepper on the nose, and then you're getting a little more cacao and perhaps a bit of summer berries from the wine as well on the palate. Especially as it softens, as the whiskey warms up a little bit, you're getting a little more summer fruit, which I really enjoy, obviously.
No, I can see where you're coming from now. Just had like the last half of my glass there, and that cacao thing for sure, like quite dark, better cacao nibs and things like that. And then it's almost like a burst of like, I keep using the word citrus, but I suppose I know strawberries are actually very citric in terms of the citric acid within them, but you do get that blackberry kind of red berry thing with it towards the end. Probably
Yeah,
the longest lingering finish of the four so far. Again, probably just because of that quite unique barrel influence as well.
Yeah, it's a good
very
one.
Good. That's very, very, very good whiskey.
Thank you.
So there's one left, and then we'll just do like some general questions and things. The peated finish.
Peated finish. So interestingly, Phil, actually, you've got in your glass there, you've got a batch 1 peated finish.
Oh, okay.
And in my glass, I have the released on Friday, the 10th, batch 2 peated finish. So you've got a little bit of history there, mate. So enjoy that one.
I will, don't worry.
So yeah, I mean, you're getting the theme now of what we've done whiskey-wise throughout. It's fully bourbon matured, and then it's finished in peated Islay whiskey casks. And I'm sure if I said a field to bottle Islay whiskey, I'm sure you'd soon pick up who I'm referencing. And those who aren't, it's Kilchoman. But rather than a collaboration with Kilchoman, we have the Jim Swan connection. We have the field to bottle connection. We have a nice relationship with Kilchoman. They're a great distillery. We've got a lot of respect for them. So we simply bought casks from them, which we finished our bourbon matured whiskey in. I think this is a really nice expression of what a little bit of maturation can do for a whiskey. If you think there's been no peat applied to our barley, as I said in the first instance, we grow the barley. We don't want to, well, no, I think I'll say it quite broadly. We don't want to make the barley taste of peat. We want it to taste like barley. We want it to be sweet and delicious. And so rather, we finish in Kilchoman casks, or in peated whiskey casks, I should say, to apply a little bit of that smoky medicinal barbecue, but still keeping the Filey Bay Whisky style running through for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the nose, I mean, it's not, for those of you who are watching this, who might fear the idea of peat and was sold on the 4 bottles so far, and then we've mentioned peat and it might put you off. Please don't, because it's not something to be scared of. And the nose is incredibly gentle. And I think it's important to take in mind, as Morgan said, it's the cask which was held peated stock. Their barley is still unpeated, and you are getting this very gentle salinity, but very nice soft saltiness to it. There's a very, very small hint of smoke. I wouldn't say you wouldn't smell this and go, it's definitely peated. You might think it was a bit more coastal. And then again, just hidden in the back, there's almost like what are they called? Like those like throat lozenge things. Is it soothers or halls, something like that? There's like
whole soothers.
Yeah, there's like a slight kind of mentally medicinalness to the back of it, which again, relates back to that Kilchoman peated style. But it's still sweet, and it's still like quite welcoming. It's quite an alluring smell, as they've all been. They kind of pull you into the glass a little bit more. I wouldn't say of any of these there is a smell which would put someone off a glass of your whiskey.
Thank you very much. That's very, very nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, which peat can do. As soon as someone gets a whiff of Lafroig or Kalila in the air, somebody can be like, no, not for me. But even with this, with that gentle, salty islandness kind of hidden in the background, it still allows you to be Filey Bay, just wearing a slightly different coat, I suppose.
That's a nice analogy. Joe, we've just heard, allows you to be Filey Bay, but wearing a slightly different coat with a peated finish. As a thumbs up for the whiskey maker there, whiskey director, Joe.
No, I'm here all day. And then as it actually tastes, it does taste a lot smokier. The finish is a lot smokier. But it's almost like kind of dry and ashy. It's not medicinal. It's not that kind of over the top seaweedy ashtrayness. It's almost like reminiscent of something like Springbank or Benromac. It's a cleaner type of peat, which I suppose Kilchoman in itself has quite a unique style of. Yeah, what a delicious collection of whiskey.
Thank you so much.
Your favourite of all of them, STR? If you had to pick one bottle.
It depends on the day of the week, but yes, I think if you asked me which one I wish I could have drank 1, 2, or 4 of this evening, it definitely would have been the STR for me, Phil. Yeah, it's my favourite. But truly, as you rightly said at the start with the Flagship, summer's day, You know, I want a lighter style of whiskey. Maybe the Flagship's what I'd go for. I like that rich creaminess, especially on the palate. I think the Flagship's got a creaminess that maybe the STR can compete with. But yeah, Flagship's great. Moscatel, if I want something sweet that gives me a big sugary hug, which is a term I'm going to nick. STR Finish, I think, is class. Really class whiskey. I think IPA is very interesting and unique. But yeah, I suppose in answer to your question, yeah, the STR Finish is my favourite whiskey we've tasted tonight.
No, that's fair. I agree. It always depends on mood and setting, but I can see why you go for the STR. I think if I did a tasting in the shop, I think it'd be a close tie between Moscatel and STR for a lot of people. I'm personally a Flagship fan. I quite enjoy that.
Nice. Classic. You're a classic. You're a classic man.
Well, not a traditionalist for sure, but certainly I like to keep things classic. Yeah, that's the whiskies. But just in terms of a couple of ideals about English whiskey.
Joe,
I know we've had a camera rotate.
We've had a camera rotate. Yeah.
If we want to talk about it, I wonder if anyone would have mentioned it in the comments at all.
Yeah.
A little sly Christopher Nolan style camera rotate.
Go on.
But with English whiskey, we've mentioned the Whiskey Guild and stuff. I don't really want to talk about that anymore. But in terms of as a sales manager yourself, and as a retail manager in my own self, as well as whiskey fans, the path for English whiskey's been very intriguing in the last 20 years. From starting from just one distillery in a place where classically whiskey wouldn't normally be made, through to distilleries like yourselves now being field to bottle, growing the barley yourselves, through to places in the city centre of London and Kensington producing English whiskey. It's a very different landscape from what it was. And as a result of doing that, I'm just intrigued to know, obviously the sky is the limit with this stuff, because you yourselves have only been distilling whiskey for 6 years. The oldest legal whiskey distillery in Scotland is only approaching like 20 or 21 years old now as we speak. So, and I believe you've just launched in America as well.
We have, yeah. We just started working with a new whiskey specialist distributor in America, Phil, a company called Impex. Now, I should clarify, I'm UK sales manager, and all of our distribution network internationally is handled by our managing director, Dave. But yeah, very proud to be in America. And for me, from what I've watched a couple of videos, we've done a couple of similar to this, to be honest, online tastings with Impex, and but heavily focused on barley and the agricultural links to what we do. We did a video with Buchladi, with Kilhoman, and we did it with Knockneen as well. And they seem really passionate, really passionate about single malt and caring about what they do. So it's nice. You've got to be very picky when you're giving somebody else opportunity to get your whiskey out on the giant landscape of America, you know. But it's nice to be working with what I would describe, from my understanding at least, as a specialist distributor over in the States. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I know a couple of people who work for Impex, or certainly are like brand ambassadors for them. Because I believe they distribute, is it Kilhoman over there as well?
Yep.
I think.
Yeah, they do Kilhoman. Yep.
I know a couple of people who work over there for them, and that's quite exciting in itself. But just tasting that range, and minus sometimes the American demand for like very, very heavily over the top peated whiskey. Like America in summertime is hot, like super hot, especially in places like Kentucky, Tennessee, well, everywhere really. I've been in America when it's summer in a few different states and cities, and it's never cold. And you can see all of those going down quite a treat.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, it's a fair comment, actually. Yeah.
And then because you're using Old Forester casks too, you know, we all like a topic, like a circular story and whatnot. So, you know, the barrels coming to yourselves in Yorkshire, maturing the spirit in them, and then if they end up in Louisville or New York or whichever cities they're going into, you know, the barrels have helped the spirit. I know they can taste sort of an English style with, I suppose, not help from them, but because there's so many bourbon casks in maturation, it's kind of crazy. But I suppose we all like a story that comes full circle. So I imagine for a lot of American customers, it'll be like another way to get into the product too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think, I wouldn't say it would be flawed to say that if you like your bourbon whiskies and if you like your American whiskies, which you may or may not, being American, you may be sick of them. But I think that sweet, rich caramel, vanilla, those kind of flavors that you associate with nice bourbon whiskey. I think it's a nice step into the world of single malt whiskey, Filey Bay Whisky. I think we're a bit of a gateway in many ways into single malt. I mean, flicking back to the peated finish, I think that's a nice gateway into peated whiskey in many ways. I think, if you were the guy who I know I was, who cracked open his dad's bottle of Talisker when he was 16, drank too much of it and couldn't drink peated whiskey for 10 years after that. I think peated finish does a good job of kind of reintroducing that style to you. And I think the Filey Bay range as a whole, from an American whiskey drinker into single malt perspective, worked in a similar fashion.
No, I fully agree. And I'm with you on the gateway and the kind of the stepping stone into that style, because I can only speak from a retail perspective again, we've had so many tourists coming back to us from America, from Australia, from numerous sort of areas of the world, because most tourism is opening up again, which is wonderful to see. And they're coming in and they're asking us specifically for local whiskey, which in the Northwest we don't have tons of. There are some, but they're not like on our doorstep. We've got a lot of gin and a lot of rum in Manchester. But when it comes to English whiskey, for the person who's buying a gift who doesn't know what someone likes, or if they know they like lighter, sweeter stuff, or something with a heavier, spicier kick, or something which we've been hearing more of these days, which is not a lot of smoke, but a little bit of smoke. I can't really see how any of these doesn't fit into that profile.
Thank you.
The only other question being with something which is quite unusual, like your IPA cask, is that a standard release? Is it something which is kind of rotated? Is it something which will be back at some point, or is it something you're always going to have?
It's a very good question. Funny enough, I remember a conversation when we'd been to the whiskey show in London last year. We sat in a Chinese restaurant, Joe and I, and our brand ambassadors, Amy and Libby, sat and ate some dim sum, and we're talking about the IPA finish and how well received it always seems to be when we're doing tastings, and how people are really interested by that. I shouldn't make any suggestion here, but that conversation was on, it would be wonderful to do a series of beer finishes, because we can. Would be wonderful too. But in answer to your question with regards to the 5 whiskies we've tasted, I think firstly, the Flagship is the only whiskey that we can absolutely guarantee forever will be available. The rest are batches, the IPA's batch 1, Moscatel and STR batch 2. As I say, the peated finish is going on to batch 2, released on shelves from Friday, which is only 3 days away, which has come quick. I think the goal potentially may be to have another, once we get to batch 3 of the STR and Moscatel, which is inevitable. After that batch, maybe we have a conversation and say, look, let's make the Moscatel a core release. Now, the gentleman doing the filming behind is aware of the complexity of making a core release from a Moscatel finish, because I quite loosely just you just take it out of one cask, put it into another, and leave it a bit and taste it. It tastes all right, whack it in a bottle. But it's actually very, complex. It's a selection of bourbon casks, then a huge disgorging, then obviously re-racking into the Moscatel casks, sampling all of those again after a period of time, and then again disgorging into diluting and then putting into a bottle. So it's easy to suggest. I would love, as a sales manager, I would love to have, Flagship, Moscatel, IPA and Peated, at least, if not all 5, as now a core release with special releases circling around that. Yes. But the sales manager isn't the guy who makes the whiskey, and there's certainly a lot of complexity to that. I think to round my answer and stop myself waffling, Flagship's the only core release. Batch numbers for the rest for the moment, but I think of all of the whiskies we've done, the one that best signifies Filey Bay, where we're at, which is, literally a mile that way is the sea, Phil. Walltop Brewery's just up there. I think IPA does a really good job of sharing our story, sharing our provenance, talking about our heritage, bringing back that field to bottle homegrown barley message. So I think if there were one that I would wish to be a core release, the IPA finish would be it. But of course, we need the brewery to go and make some more whiskey matured IPA Indeed, as well. So there's many moving parts there,
Yeah, I think that's very well explained, because I think for a lot of people, as you said, they just think it's a case of stick it in a barrel, leave it for a bit. If it tastes good, we'll bottle it. If it doesn't, we'll wait. And there is so much more to like whiskey production than that. But yeah, they're all wonderful little unique things that you've got there. And with the American spirit scene and just drink scene the way it is at the minute, the fact you've launched there, that could be like just very exciting in general. So that's quite a cool thing to hear from not local to myself, but indeed local to the country. And it's good to see more brands pushing out there, which is quite nice. I think that was everything I sort of had planned, really, Morgan. No other questions from my end.
Great.
Oh, one other actually, just before we kind of call it a day. You said you had, is it Filey Bay Whisky Day? Is on the 30th and 31st of July.
So Filey Bay Whisky is the whiskey range. Spirit of Yorkshire is the distillery name.
Yes.
So so thank you for bringing it back. That's kind of you. Yeah, on the 30th and 31st of July this year, we have an open day. It's our first one since the beginning of the pandemic, of course. And another thing with that is, one thing, it's great to hear that after every show you get queues of people trying to hear about Filey Bay Whisky in your shop, Phil. But what we've got to remind ourselves is our first release was 6 months before a global pandemic. So we didn't have a chance to get to shows and taste to people. So we're almost the new kids on the block, even though we've actually had whiskey for a few years now, But yeah, flicking back to the open day, tours throughout, tastings throughout the day on the 30th. So Joe will be doing whiskey tastings. We're getting some local producers who we work with, so smokehouse style smokehouse. We've got cheese producers, we've got the brewery here exhibiting all of their wares, and we'll be always bringing it back to whiskey, pairing food with whiskey, showing people around. We've got a local cooperage potentially coming to show off the process of making whiskey casks. It should be a fun day. Yeah, it's a nice way to celebrate all things Filey Bay Whisky, basically.
Yeah, peak British summertime, local whiskey, local beer, local cheese, local smokehouse stuff. That all sounds like quite a nice way to spend a weekend to me.
Yeah. Well, you'd be more than welcome, Phil. You'd be more than welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm overdue much holiday, so maybe we can try and sort that out between us at some point.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, I will. Oh, there you go. I've just been given the warning sign for we've only got 10 minutes left of this call. So what I will do, Morgan, I will kill the recording here and just say thank you to yourself and Joe for camera operating and just talking us through this, because I know you and I have been trying to do this for a while, and hopefully I should get this edited and out on Wednesday. So at some point you'll get a little tag somewhere saying that it's up and live.
Great.
Yeah, thank you to the two of you for doing this again. You can't see me, but I am raising my glass to you, but for some reason my camera still doesn't work. But no, thank you to the two of you for doing this. Thank you for staying by and have to work. And
no, pleasure.
Yeah, hopefully you will be seeing a Whiskey Wednesday review soon in full of myself with this flagship bottle, because we don't have it in stock in this shop in Manchester, but I believe another shop around the corner in Manchester does. So I'll pop around there soon and purchase a bottle of that. But
cheers, Phil.
Yeah, thank you to the two of you.
That's probably an unnecessary, not necessary, but we'll cross that bridge. Cross that bridge.
It's all right, don't worry. I like to make sure I buy things because it just keeps it all on the level. But yeah, we will hopefully be seeing yourself again soon, Morgan, and certainly you'll be seeing Filey Bay on Whiskey Wednesday at some point.
Great, thanks, Phil.